Thanks for the upgrade. Alex grinned, strolling into the living room like he owned the place. He tossed his sunglasses onto the coffee table, the leather strap of his new watch gleaming under the light as if it had a story to tell. Every step he took seemed to scream confidence. Or maybe arrogance. His suit was perfectly tailored, shoes gleaming as though they were made for a runway. And his luggage, labeled with designer logos, was scattered around the room like a trophy collection. I watched him, arms crossed, my eyes narrow. He stood there, basking in the glow of his own success, waiting for me to congratulate him, to admire him. He didn't know that I could see right through him now. So, how was your trip? I asked, my voice surprisingly light, almost cheerful, but inside, my stomach was twisting. Oh, it was incredible, he continued, casually pulling out his phone to check for new messages. First class all the way to Europe. 5-star hotels. And don't even get me started on the shopping. I'm telling you, Lily, this is the kind of life I've been missing. You have no idea. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I let out a small laugh, one that didn't match my thoughts at all. It wasn't because I found him amusing. No, I wasn't laughing at his stories or the lavish lifestyle he was now flaunting. I was laughing because I couldn't believe how far he'd fallen. I couldn't believe how badly he thought he had me fooled. Alex frowned, his smile faltering. What's so funny? His voice sharpened, growing defensive. Oh, Alex. I shook my head, a faint smile playing on my lips. You have no idea what you've done. He stared at me, not understanding a word I just said. And for the first time, I realized something he never would. I've always believed in the power of a partnership. When Alex and I first met, everything felt like it was meant to be. He was the dreamer, the one who had big ideas and a way with words that made everything sound possible. He painted pictures of our future, trips to exotic places, endless opportunities, the life we deserved, and I was the one who made it all happen. I worked hard, stayed focused, and kept the wheels turning. It wasn't always easy, but I thought we made a great team. I was in cybersecurity, securing other people's data, keeping them safe from fraud and online threats. Meanwhile, Alex bounced from one business venture to the next, always promising the next big thing was right around the corner. And for a long time, I believed him. I stood by him, ignoring the signs, the subtle red flags I'd brush off as him being just a little too ambitious or too caught up in his latest idea. After all, what's a little secrecy between partners, right? But looking back now, I can't ignore the weight of those warning signs. The way he'd always be vague about his finances. The times he'd change the subject when I asked about his latest project. The constant excuses for why he didn't have a steady income. I had a steady career. A predictable life. But that was never enough for him. I thought we were building something together. But in reality, I was building his dreams. While mine were put on hold. I kept going, telling myself it was temporary. He had a way of making everything sound so exciting, so big, that I didn't want to question it. After all, a team was supposed to support each other, right? But there's a difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Now, I see that I had ignored the warning signs for far too long. That's where I went wrong. Before I share what happened next, the moment that changed everything. The moment that left Alex in complete disbelief, I want to connect with you. My amazing viewers, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. It was a quiet night when it all started to unravel. I had just finished working late, my eyes heavy from hours spent glued to the screen, analyzing data and securing files. The house was still, and for a moment, I felt the rare comfort of silence. I was halfway through preparing a cup of tea when my phone buzzed with a notification. At first, I ignored it, but then another one came through. And another. A flood of alerts, all from my banking app. Curious, I opened the app, expecting to see the usual minor transactions. Instead, my heart dropped. Nearly $50 in charges. Designer clothes, 5-star hotels, flights to Paris. Each transaction was more extravagant than the last. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I scrolled through the list. trying to make sense of it all. But there was no mistaking it. This wasn't some random fraudster, it was Alex. He was the one behind it all. I couldn't believe it at first. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. How could he do this to me? To us? But then, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. Instead, I thought of something that made me smile. The card he had used wasn't even a real one. It was a dummy card. One that I had tied to a training program at work. The card was designed specifically to catch fraud like this. Every transaction automatically triggered an alert that went straight to the authorities. Alex had just signed his own confession without even knowing it. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the situation settle in. I wasn't angry. I was almost impressed by how reckless he had been. He thought he was being clever. But he just handed me the perfect opportunity to put an end to this. I grabbed my phone and texted Chloe. "You're not going to believe this." I typed, my fingers moving quickly over the screen. I explained everything, the fraudulent charges, the card, and how Alex had unknowingly turned himself into a case study for one of my programs. Chloe's response came almost instantly. Wait, he used the dummy card? The one linked to fraud detection? I smiled. Exactly. Genius, she replied sarcastically. He's a moron. I couldn't help but laugh. It felt good to know that at least someone found the humor in the situation. But as I sat there, staring at the list of purchases, the reality set in. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the final straw. From that moment on, I was done trying to protect him. This wasn't a simple financial blunder, it was betrayal. He thought he could steal from me and get away with it. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. The days that followed were a strange mix of quiet anticipation and the steady hum of strategy in my mind. Alex had no idea I was onto him. He continued with his usual bravado, bragging about his upgrades and his extravagant trip, as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I was carefully preparing for what was coming next. Every day, I checked my phone, watching the fraud alerts come in, each one more ridiculous than the last. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing exactly how it was going to end but powerless to stop it. I couldn't let him get away with this. I couldn't let him think for a second that this would just blow over. This was too big, too deliberate. Alex had crossed a line. And I was finally ready to make him face the consequences. I spent the next few days gathering everything, screenshotting the charges, documenting the fraud alerts, and double-checking the details of my training program's dummy card. Chloe and I had agreed that we needed to be methodical. This wasn't just about catching Alex in the act, it was about ensuring that everything was airtight. I couldn't afford to let a single detail slip through the cracks. I called Chloe again, going over every little detail with her, confirming our next steps. "We're almost there," she said, her voice a little too calm for my liking. Like she enjoyed the thrill of this more than she should. "Once we've got all the evidence, I'll get Agent Morgan involved. He's already on standby." Agent Morgan had been a godsend. He had experience with cases like this, and I knew he'd help tie up the legal side of things. But there was something about the idea of Alex walking into that trap that made my stomach tighten with a mix of dread and relief. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about showing him that I wasn't someone he could walk all over anymore. The day after I confirmed everything was in place, Alex left me a note on the kitchen counter. "Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up." His words were as arrogant as ever, as if he had no clue what was coming. I could hardly contain the smile that tugged at my lips as I read it. He was using my stolen money to live it up, and all I had to do was wait for the authorities to catch up with him. But I wasn't going to let it be that simple. I wanted to make sure that he was fully aware of what he'd done when the hammer finally came down. So, I waited, and I watched. Every night, I saw the fraud alerts roll in, luxury restaurants, expensive shopping sprees, flights to exotic destinations, and every time, I felt a small thrill of victory. Each purchase was another piece of evidence, another step closer to the inevitable. I spent my evenings in silence, my phone in hand, checking alerts, coordinating with Chloe and Agent Morgan. I stayed calm, kept my distance from Alex, and let him continue to dig his own grave deeper with each passing day. I knew the moment was coming, the moment when everything would come crashing down. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Alex came back that evening, still high on his own self-importance. As if the world revolved around his every whim. He swaggered into the living room, fresh from his indulgences, his new purchases still gleaming with the glow of stolen luxury. I could see it in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought everything was perfect. He thought I was still the clueless wife, playing along with his charades. "Look at this," he said, holding up a designer jacket like it was some kind of trophy. "You should see the shops in Paris. Lily, you wouldn't believe it, I swear. The life we could have had if you just loosened up a bit." He tossed the jacket carelessly onto the couch and sank into the chair across from me. Eyes gleaming. "Thanks for the upgrade, by the way. You really outdid yourself this time." I didn't even flinch. Instead, I just stared at him, my fingers tightly gripping the edge of my coffee mug. Every part of me wanted to stand up and scream at him for being so utterly ridiculous. For thinking I would ever fall for his act again. But I didn't. I sat there, calm, almost detached, watching him. The longer he rambled, the more he sealed his own fate. "You really don't get it, do you?" I finally said, my voice so steady it almost surprised me. Alex raised an eyebrow, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Get what?" he asked, clearly enjoying this twisted little game he thought we were playing. "I've worked hard for this. Lily, you should be proud of me." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, letting the silence linger for a moment longer. "You don't get that it's over, Alex," I said quietly. "You don't get that you've already lost." His face froze. For the first time, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something more defensive. "What are you talking about?" I let out a soft laugh, almost to myself. "You really think I wouldn't notice? That you could just steal from me and walk away without a scratch?" I shook my head, the bitterness in my smile sharp. "You've been living in a fantasy world, Alex, and now it's time for the real world to catch up with you." His confusion turned to anger, and he shot up from his chair, pacing in front of me. "What the hell are you talking about?" His voice was louder now, more frantic. "I didn't steal anything. What's this? Some kind of game you're playing? You're going to accuse me of something that ridiculous?" I could barely hold back my amusement at his desperation. "It's not a game, Alex," I said, my tone cold and calm. "You're about to find out just how real this is. Those credit card charges? The ones you've been flaunting?" I paused, watching him swallow hard. "They've been flagged. Every single one of them. The moment you used that card, you signed your own confession. And now, the authorities are on their way." His face paled, the color drained from his cheeks. And for a brief moment, I could see the panic starting to set in. But he quickly masked it with an arrogance that only made him look more pathetic. "You're bluffing," he said, though his voice wavered. "You can't possibly." "Call them," I said, cutting him off. "Go ahead, pick up the phone, call your lawyers, call whoever you want. It's over. This time, you're not getting out of it." His bravado crumbled in an instant. I could see the reality settling in for him now. The truth that he couldn't escape. "Lily, please," he begged, his tone shifting from defiance to desperation. "This is crazy. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me. You can't do this." I stood up slowly, my gaze never leaving his. "I thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives." "Alex," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. "Guess we're both learning something today." The sound of a knock at the door interrupted the silence. And my heart didn't race with fear. It wasn't fear I felt, it was relief. The moment had finally arrived. "You should go answer that," I said, watching his face crumble as he realized what was happening. He stumbled toward the door, still trying to play it cool. But I could see his hands shaking now. As he opened it, Agent Morgan stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The cool, authoritative presence of the law was enough to send Alex into a tailspin. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," Agent Morgan said, his voice steady and professional. "I'm Agent Morgan. We've been investigating some fraudulent activity tied to your credit card accounts." We need to have a word with you. Alex's face turned white. He sputtered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. The officers stepped forward, and I watched as they gently but firmly placed him in handcuffs. This is a mistake. You don't understand, he yelled, his voice rising in panic. I stood in the background, my arms crossed, a slight smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. No, Alex, you don't understand. This was your mistake, I said, my voice low but sharp. And now, it's time to pay the price. As the officers escorted him out, Alex kept protesting, but I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I had already won. I had taken control back from him. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Completely, utterly free. The silence that followed was almost deafening. As the door clicked shut behind the officers and Alex's protests faded into the distance, I stood there, rooted to the spot for a moment. I didn't feel relief at first, just a strange emptiness. But then, it slowly began to settle in. I wasn't just standing in an empty house. I was standing in the aftermath of everything I had endured. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. A sense of finality. I walked over to the couch where Alex's things were scattered, the jacket he had thrown so carelessly, the shoes he had kicked off like they were worth nothing. It all seemed so trivial now. He had made it all about the stuff. The image, the chase for something he never could have earned on his own. And in the end, it had cost him everything. I picked up the phone and dialed Chloe. She picked up on the first ring. He's gone, isn't he? She said. Her voice steady but laced with something softer, maybe pride. He's gone, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. And it's over. Good, she said, her tone turning sharp. I knew you'd handle it. But I gotta admit, the way you did it? Brilliant. This is going to hit him harder than he realizes. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Chloe knew me well enough by now to understand that. For me, this wasn't just about getting back at Alex. It was about closing a chapter I'd left open for far too long. About reclaiming my life, my freedom. The next few days were a blur. The investigation moved quickly, as I knew it would. Chloe had been right about the evidence being airtight. Every charge, every fraud alert, every piece of documentation, all of it pointed straight to Alex. He couldn't talk his way out of this one. The damage was done, and it was too late to cover it up. I felt oddly detached from it all. Almost like I was watching someone else's life unfold. When Agent Morgan called to give me an update, I listened as he went over the charges. The penalties Alex would face. It was a lot. Multiple counts of fraud. Unauthorized use of financial accounts. Theft. The federal charges would likely stick. And with the amount of money involved, Alex was looking at serious time. But I didn't feel sympathy for him. Not anymore. I spent the following week finalizing everything with the authorities. Watching as Alex's world crumbled around him. His bank accounts were frozen. His assets seized. And word spread like wildfire. The charming, carefree husband who had once flaunted his wealth was now a cautionary tale. A joke among our mutual friends. I wasn't surprised to hear that Nicole, his latest fling, the one I'd suspected for months, had dropped him as soon as the arrest went public. The high life he'd been living was nothing but smoke and mirrors. And now, there was nothing left to hold up the facade. The night the divorce papers arrived was a strange one. It felt almost surreal, as if everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the years of quietly tolerating his behavior, was just a bad dream. I tore open the envelope, scanning through the legal language until my eyes landed on the one thing that mattered, finalized and irrevocable. It was over. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper for a long time. I didn't cry, didn't feel any anger bubbling up. I just felt peace. A deep, undeniable peace. Because I knew, in that moment, that I was free. Free from the constant worry, the confusion, the sense of being trapped in someone else's mess. For the first time in years, I was free to be me. To make decisions that were mine alone. To live a life that was mine to control. Chloe came over the next day to drop off some final paperwork. She found me sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, staring out the window. "How are you doing?" she asked, settling down next to me. Better than I thought I would, I said, offering her a small smile. Strangely calm, Chloe gave me that knowing look. That's because you've already won. Lily, you didn't just survive this, you came out stronger. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. She was right. I had been broken, yes, but now I was whole again. Not because of what had happened, but because of how I handled it. I didn't just let go of the past, I took back control of my future. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. I redecorated the apartment, throwing out the last remnants of Alex's presence. I even booked a solo trip. Something I'd been putting off for years. It was time to do something just for me. And then, just when I thought I could breathe again, I got a call from Chloe. He's accepted the plea deal. She told me, no jail time, but he'll have to pay back everything. His credit's ruined, and the banks are coming after him for the full amount. It's going to be a long time before he can come back from this. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of something, satisfaction. Maybe, justice had been served, and though I didn't feel pity for Alex, I felt something like closure. He had wanted the high life, but now he'd get to see how the other half lived, struggling. Humbled, with no one left to impress. A few weeks later, I bumped into an old friend of his at a cafe. We exchanged pleasantries, and I couldn't help but notice the way she glanced at me. She'd heard about everything that had gone down, and there was a certain respect in her eyes, a respect I hadn't seen in a long time. Alex's charm had never been enough to mask the truth, and now the truth was all anyone could see. That night, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine in my hand, watching the city lights flicker below, I realized how far I had come. The person I was before, docile, supportive, always putting Alex first, was gone. In her place was someone who had learned to trust herself, to stand up for what she deserved. It had taken a long time, but I had finally found my way back to me. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The divorce papers were just a piece of paper. What mattered was the new life I was building. And that life? It was all mine. As I stood there, reflecting on everything I had gone through, I realized just how important it is to take control of your own story. We all have moments where we feel stuck, where we think things will never change, but they can. It's up to us to rewrite our narrative, to take that first step toward the life we truly deserve. If you found inspiration in this story, if you've ever fought to reclaim your own freedom or overcome betrayal, I want you to be part of this journey. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because I've got more stories that will resonate with you. Together, we can explore not just the pain of the past, but the incredible strength we find in ourselves along the way. Don't forget to turn on notifications, so you never miss out on another empowering story. This is just the beginning. Let's keep growing together.